Jeffrey Dahmer, the world's most famous serial killer. On July 22, 1991 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, police officers brought out 4 severed heads, 7 human skulls, 2 human hearts, and several other dismembered body parts and organs from the house of Jeffrey Dahmer. You're about to hear Jeffrey Dahmer's story, the intricate nature of his childhood, and his transition from an adolescent alcoholic to a homicidal maniac, bearing names like Milwaukee Cannibal, which led to his eventual arrest and demise. This is the true story of Jeffrey Dahmer, a man that will go down in history as one of the most gruesome and infamous serial killers. If you're familiar with any serial killer story, you'll know that they all have one thing in common: a tragic backstory and childhood that's full of trauma and abuse. This isn't the case for Jeffrey Dahmer. He was born on May 21, 1960 to Joyce Annette and Lionel Dahmer. He was the first of 2 sons, and for the most part, his family was somewhat stable. His dad worked as a research chemist at Marquette University, and his mom was more of a stay-at-home wife. They say Joyce Annette was a little unstable and attention-seeking and was sometimes suicidal, which didn't bode well with their marriage to Lionel, who was always away from home. The Dahmer family also moved a lot, and his parents were almost constantly fighting. This made their marriage shaky, and they neglected their oldest sons. Dahmer stated that he did feel abandoned as a child, and this was corroborated by one of his teachers. But Jeffrey Dahmer had a fair amount of friends while growing up, and from a young age he was fascinated by dead animals, and he would often question his father on how to preserve them. He was amused by decapitating animals and staking them to a tree as a way of pranking his friends. Dahmer just had an innate fondness for lifeless carcasses. At age 14, he was a bit of an outcast in school. He had started drinking alcohol and was frequently inebriated, yet his teachers still saw him as a guy who was polite and upright. He discovered he was gay by the age of 15, during which he started to fantasize about dominating and controlling every aspect of intercourse with a male lover. But the problem was, most of his fantasies had to do with the dissection of the male body and then making love to it afterward. At a point, he even attempted to knock out a male jogger and have his way with them. Soon his grades started to decline in school, and he became a class clown, doing all kinds of tricks for money so he could buy booze. By 1977, his parents had divorced, and Dahmer graduated from high school a year later. In 1978, his mom and brother moved out of their family home, and so did his dad. And for the first time, Jeffrey Dahmer was living alone in the family house. What do you get when you leave a gay kid with abandonment issues, a dependency on alcohol, a fondness for dead things, and the dissection of human beings, all alone in a big house? You get a serial killer. 3 weeks after his graduation, Dahmer found a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks on the road, and he lured Hicks to his house with the promise of drinks and some company. He stated that he was sexually stirred upon meeting Hicks bare-chested on the road. But Hicks was a straight male, so he knew all sexual advances would be refused. After they both had a few drinks and Hicks wanted to leave, Dahmer wasn't okay with that. So he bludgeoned him with a dumbbell, knocking him unconscious. He proceeded to strangle Hicks to death, stripping him and masturbated to Hicks' naked body. He dragged Hicks to the basement and then dissected his body. He buried the remains in his backyard. This was Jeffrey Dahmer's first murder. After that, he joined the army as a combat medic upon his dad's insistence, but he was honorably discharged due to his alcohol abuse. He lived in Florida for a while working in a sandwich shop, but he spent most of his money on alcohol, so he was unable to pay rent. He moved in with his dad and stepmom, but again, he couldn't live with them due to his alcohol abuse. So he moved in with his grandmother in 1982 and found work as a phlebotomist. He was even arrested for indecent exposure and public masturbation in front of a 12-year-old. He started to visit gay bars and bathhouses and engaged in sexual practices, but he did not like the fact that his partners moved during the process because he wanted them to lie still. He resulted in drugging guys with sedatives and having his way with their motionless bodies. He fantasized about having sex with dead bodies and even considered digging bodies out of graves. But seeing how taxing and stressful that would be, he decided he would start making his own dead bodies. So in 1987, Dahmer was ready to start killing again. Between the time of his first murder to his capture, Dahmer killed up to 17 persons. Going through them all would take a while. But just know that Dahmer found himself with an urge to kill, and he was fond of satisfying this urge. In one instance, he killed a 25-year-old man by the name of Stephen Tuomi, and crushed his chest and ribs without having any recollection of doing so. His technique wasn't that complicated. He'd visit a gay bar, lure his victim to his grandmother's house, and then drug his victim, kill his victim by strangulation, and then proceed to make love to the bodies. He would chop the body into bits and boil the skin off the bones. Sometimes he would use the skull as a masturbation tool. He eventually moved into his own place after his grandmother kicked him out due to his alcohol abuse and the foul odor that came out of his room. In his apartment, he took things up a notch and started storing more body parts, keeping them for future use. This is what would become known as his skull collection. In his later interviews, he noted that he was trying to create an altar of skulls. At some point, he was arrested for drugging and molesting a young boy of about 13 years. He served 5 years on probation for his crimes against young adolescent boys. But even while all that was going on, he continued killing. At some point, he even started taking pictures of himself and the corpse. Sometimes he would decapitate the heads of his victims and start chatting with them. Dahmer even attempted to zombify his victims, seeking to put them in a vegetative state so they wouldn't be keen on leaving him. He did this by drilling holes in the skulls of the men and pouring a solution inside the holes, while they were still alive. This didn't work out so well, as in one of these cases, a young boy escaped his grasp and ran into 3 women and a police officer. But Dahmer explained to the officer that the boy was his boyfriend and he just had too much to drink. And so, the police let him go. And on returning home, Dahmer killed this young boy, and he continued in his ways until 1991. One of the major reasons why it took so long to capture Jeffrey Dahmer was because of his charisma and overall friendliness. He just didn't look or feel like an evil person. Even in his later interviews, he seemed so trustworthy and approachable that it was hard to believe he was a serial killer. But on July 22, 1991, his luck ran out. He approached 3 gay men at a local bar and offered $100 for a nude photo op. 32-year-old Tracy Edwards agreed to this and accompanied Dahmer to his home, where he noticed the foul odor that emanated from his apartment. Dahmer proceeded to handcuff Edwards on one hand, instead of 2 while holding a knife, and it was this singular mistake that ultimately doomed him. Edwards was spooked but proceeded to the bedroom for the photos. Edwards then saw nude pictures of men and a drum of water that gave off a foul smell. At some point, Edwards managed to punch Dahmer in the face and ran out of the apartment. Luckily, he found a Milwaukee police patrol car and told them his story. They tried to remove the handcuff, but their keys didn't fit. So they escorted him back to the apartment to get it off until they noticed that something was off. And as they searched the apartment, they saw the morbid hell that Dahmer had stashed away. They found the human organs, they found the pictures, they found the skulls, and all sorts of horrific remains. And so they arrested Jeffrey Dahmer. Upon his arrest, Dahmer sighed and said, "For what I did, I should be dead." Dahmer was very open about the things he did. He claims that confessing and helping the police identify the bodies was a small way he could make up for the things he'd done. He waived his right to an attorney and pleaded guilty to all charges. In his words, "I created this horror, it only makes sense that I do everything to put an end to it." Even though he had an insatiable urge to kill, Dahmer says that he never really meant to kill anyone. In the end, he was just looking for company. In the end, Dahmer was charged with 15 counts of murder. His trial began on January 30th, 1992, and he was sentenced to life in prison for all counts. The funny thing is, even though his defense claimed that he had a few personality and mental disorders, Jeffrey Dahmer was mentally sane when he committed all these crimes. He was in a sound state of mind, which just makes him all the more nefarious. It's no wonder E. Michael McCann, one of the attorneys involved in Dahmer's case, said, "The word evil doesn't come up very often. It just doesn't. Because evil is almost a moral issue." But that word came up with Dahmer. Dahmer was transferred to the Columbia Correctional Institution. After his sentence, he became a born-again Christian and was even baptized. It's said that he repented for all his crimes, but was ready for whatever harm was coming his way. He was eventually bludgeoned to death by fellow inmate Jesse Anderson. And on November 28, 1994, Jeffrey Dahmer died in the hospital after suffering severe wounds on his head. His story's been told and retold in various movies and documentaries, and most recently on Netflix. And to this day, Jeffrey Dahmer is considered one of the most notorious serial killers in the last century, and perhaps in all of human history. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, make sure to subscribe for more.